So hello and welcome everyone. Welcome back to Fugitive Chefs podcast. And this, as you know, this is a podcast about chefs and people in food who have walked away from traditional kitchens to create something more free, more sustainable, more meaningful. And just these three words that I say, very relatable person on this podcast right now is Maximillian Bogenmann. If I hope I pronounced your last name correctly. Welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, my parents are the only ones who call me Maximillian, but I think you did pretty well.
Yeah, okay, so we're gonna stick to Max for the rest of the podcast.
Yeah.
And Max's story, I mean, I'm gonna try to sum it up, and then Max, you should tell us more about what is it that you do currently. So, from what I know about Max, he's one of the co-founders of Endless Food Co. in Copenhagen. It's one of these food companies coming out of Amass. If I'm not wrong, all three of you and all the other two partners are coming from Amass, and you especially have trained and worked in the restaurant itself. Now, Amass, the little I know about it, used to be a very sustainable restaurant. It had to shut down a few years ago, also because of the similar concept and ideology behind the restaurant, right? I remember when I was first there, we had like a lecture through Matt Academy, and we had a chat with Kim and Matt, and also I've met interns coming out of Amass, which is very interesting, because they used to tell me more stories of like how Matt or everybody in the teams literally knows what's inside the fridge, and they will just say like, keep this in the fridge for some point. And these interns were like, I really doubt this guy will remember he's asking me to keep this in the fridge. And then somebody takes that out and makes something out of it, right? That was the kind of restaurants. Also, like one of the stories I've heard of how all the washing the potatoes and washing the vegetables and using that for then floor cleaning and kitchen cleaning. So for me, like somebody who's not even stepped into a mass kitchen side of things, it's very interesting how this restaurant made a lot of movement as far as sustainable comes, also based in a very cool area in Copenhagen with a small vegetable garden opposite it. And I'm giving this context for people who do not know like what Amass is. And it's very interesting to know that, because I think a lot of what we're going to hear from Max about Amass and beyond the journey, how all of it is so far from everyday restaurant business. Today, Max is here because they have started a company. It's called, I don't know if THIC is what you properly call it. It's called This Isn't Chocolate, right? Correct me if that's not the correct name.
Yeah, well, I mean, actually, so we go by Endless Food Company, and our main sort of focus is called THIC.
Right. And this is a chocolate replacement, but it's made with like the brewery waste, if I'm not wrong. It's like substreams of brewery.
Exactly. I think our main focus is just using large-scale side streams from the food industry to create a sort of commercially viable, sustainable version of chocolate where we don't have to rely on the sort of fragile supply chain that cacao sort of exists in at the moment.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's not just you making use of that brewery waste, but it's also replacing something which already has, I wouldn't say damage, but people know they have to look for alternatives for it, because all the people I've spoken to in chocolate, there's like so many problems. First of all, where it comes from, how much slavery is still a part of chocolate business every day, how unorganized the sector itself, and how it's also something which people don't think twice before consuming, but it's something which takes a very long process before it reaches that bar. And where does Endless Food Co. stand in this whole mix of problems, issues that have? What is the kind of solution you're bringing over there?
Yeah, I mean, I think the main thing is that, we started with a lot of industry research. I think before we did anything sort of real or tangible, we tried to learn as much as we could about the existing chocolate industry. And it was pretty clear from the onset that there are pain points all throughout the sort of the ladder, if you want to say. And I think everything sort of points back to rising global temperatures or sort of climate change, if you want to say it like that. And everything from sort of growing areas that are stricken by drought. 70% of the world's cacao comes from West Africa, and that area has been hit very hard by drought, which means that we're not producing at the same levels that we're sort of used to and that the industry is kind of depending on. That also forces farmers to sort of spread outward, and that means that we're cutting down sort of very biodiverse areas of rainforest to create more arable land for cacao. All of these things, of course, have a price effect in the market, and that means that existing confectionery, baking, and just food manufacturers in general are really battling with the volatility of the chocolate market. And so, there is kind of a sliding scale from sustainability to price factors that are sort of driving the movement in this market. And Endless exists as hopefully a solution partner also with existing chocolate companies to provide something with lower CO2 footprint, a longer sort of supply chain and more price stability. And then also at its core, a very tasty product, right? Sort of as either a replacement for chocolate or something that can be side by side or used in hybrid formulations. Yeah, and then I think, what we always say is what we're trying to future-proof the chocolate industry for the next generation, because, yeah, maybe a world without chocolate is a sad one.
No, definitely the one that I don't see myself in. But all that you said about Max, I mean, the solution you speak about looks. I think people listening to this are very clear now on how many challenges it has. And still, it's very interesting for me what you mentioned about it being delicious, it having its applications, and how you're looking at the industry side of things as well, which I feel, because of my work right now, I meet a lot of people doing similar with chocolate, coffee, all these vulnerable, I would say, food chains, how people are looking for solutions for that. The pitch that kind of you have made at this moment, many of the pitches I've heard don't include that part of it. They're all about focusing on a lower price point, on something more stable, not fluctuating much, but there's not much talk about how much does it act like chocolate, how much does it taste like or similar to chocolate. But also what's interesting for me is because this podcast is going to be about how chefs like you leave the brigade and do something beyond it. Because somebody listening to this, just the 2 minutes you spoke before me starting to speak, are already so different from what a chef's everyday knowledge or everyday activity is like. And then we want to rethink with it, what else can a chef be beyond just being in restaurants? And also seeing how a restaurant can make a movement, but how that movement can be much more impactful when it goes beyond its limits of a city or a kitchen and becomes a food company. So before we dive into all of that, Max, I would just like to hear from you, like, as I speak about you right now, did you think you would be somebody doing this? Like, was the first idea you had of being chef, was it that you'd be studying statistics on chocolate and making a chocolate replacement, or where did it come from?
No, I think, it was a very simple interest in eating. And that's maybe a bit reductive, but when I was young, I think I just really liked food, right? And coming from a Korean Swiss background where every sort of family gathering was focused around food, whether it was a celebration or something else. I think food was always present in different ways. I think it has always been sort of a big part of my life. I think I didn't imagine I would be in this position in food. Mostly because I didn't know really, even until sort of in the recent years, what actually was possible within food outside of actually working in restaurants. I think if I really look back, I can home ec class in 7th grade, and I have an incredibly distinct memory of we had to make chili con carne one day for our project, and our teacher was like, okay, so take a bite, and then the next bite, take a bite and sprinkle some salt on top of that bite before you eat it. And I was like, it was the first time that I had seen such or felt and tasted such a big difference in sort of how food can present itself. Not that has sort of driven my whole interest in food. I just remember it as sort of such a clear, holy shit, you can do quite a bit with small sort of adjustments. And I think, thinking about that, I think I moved forward and I was like, cool, I really would like to maybe deal with food at some point in my career. And so I did the sort of typical process that you do where you go to culinary school and then you're like, okay, I need to work in a restaurant, and sort of the accolades of that restaurant will drive me, will forge the path. So I'll sort of find the restaurants that have the stars, and we'll go from there. And then probably, hopefully one day I become a sous chef, and maybe one day I become a chef. And then maybe one day I'll have my own restaurant, and that will kind of be the story, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that's kind of a pretty typical path of how a lot of people envision working with food. And I think it was only up until a couple of years ago that I realized shit, there are so many different ways that you could actually utilize your experience and creativity and maybe expertise with food and flavor in multiple different industries. And I think that really opened up sort of the possibilities for us and also for myself. And I think that's also why I felt comfortable going into such a different space that is still very much connected to food, but kind of integrates multiple different aspects of either business or sales, for example. If I told myself I would be partly a salesman, I'm pretty sure I would have been very disappointed. 12-year-old me would be very disappointed. But I think it's also the fun of sort of integrating all of these other things surrounding food.
Yeah, no, I mean, in your own words, the possibilities are endless as their company. Right? And it's funny for me, like so much to say on all that you've shared. Like one of them I completely relate with because I felt in your words how you humbled down the experience of like putting the salt in that, but I can totally connect with it because for me, for example, everybody asks me like what like the few questions that people know how to talk to a chef is what is your what cuisine are you best at, or what's your specialty, which no chef has an answer to. What do you best cook, or like why did you get into kitchen? And these are the questions which they ask every chef, but nobody has the clear answer for it. But for me also, like when I think about like why did I get into kitchen, I had this period of life where I was like very young and I had like yellow fever, so I was at home for 3 months. And the smallest of things that actually woke me up and felt like today we think about it that yes, food is the only thing that you actually put in your mouth and it's the only thing you experience through flavor, right? Because the other thing you put is like pharmaceutical drugs, but you never taste them as such. And then the fact that you could control that, like I used to cut, I remember cutting okra for my mother to help her cook it. And then seeing that small piece of oddly cut okra in the plate, that itself for me was like, oh, this is so cool because I'm consuming something, I'm connected with it, has like a footprint of me. And the same thing with the experience of how a small thing like a salt, which is mostly ignored as a cheap grocery item, can transform food. And that small impact can be so massive, and what all you can do through food. So that was one thing I related very much with your story. And also what you spoke about, the sales part of things, because I feel that's one skill chefs are the worst at. And then this job that you're doing right now lets you, develop that kind of a skill. So it's super interesting for me. And I also relate with you that I think this typical career, we have this imagination only because that's the only way we know through schools or through the placements they have. That's the only career they kind of show you. And which is what also the intention of the podcast is, because there could be chefs who are good at something, but they are not the ones who are going to grow up the ladder like the ones who can, like who are built for that. There should be people who should be in the industry doing restaurants. And there are those who have talent for other things, and they should not kill themselves over climbing the ladder if there is something they can do out of the bigger bubble of things. And that's very interesting for me, how this you have connected us kind of from your past through culinary school to this present of yours,
Yeah.
And tell us a little about your first few restaurants you work at. Was it directly Amass? How did you end up there? Or what kind of restaurants did you work at before having this realization,
Yeah, I also was, before I left, so I went to university in California. My parents kind of forced me to, that they would not let me go directly into a kitchen. Mm-hmm. Which, in hindsight, maybe was pretty useful for me now also. But I did spend, almost a year working as, essentially, if I look back at it, I just worked full time for free for like a small bistro back home, because I kind of was like, well, that's what you do, right? Yeah. So I did that, and I think it was actually quite valuable. Looking back, I think maybe sort of, the balance of power was a little bit lopsided, but that's okay. Then I moved to New York, and I'm definitely, of that generation that someone handed me, I think it was my father, he handed me Kitchen Confidential.
Okay, yeah.
And it's like, then you read that book, and then I'm pretty sure a whole generation of chefs were sort of romanticizing this hardcore pirate chef life where you worked hard but you also partied hard, and that was kind of like, wow, I'm gonna go to New York and I'm gonna kind of like envelop myself in this world, right? I worked in a restaurant called Dovetail, which was opened by one of the former French Laundry chefs, and that was an amazing place because it was something that I also sort of fell into, but also it was a very small restaurant. We didn't have prep cooks, so we had to kind of do everything from A to Z. And that's also, I think, incredibly valuable when I look back on it, because I had the opportunity to butcher all the meat that was on my station, to prep all the vegetables that were on my station, to fillet all the fish or whatever, but you really kind of see the process from A to Z. And I think even at that time that wasn't always the case in other places, right? You kind of have different teams or prep help to do different aspects of the process. But there it was really sort of like you saw end to end. I also sort of did an internship at a place called Corton, which was a 2-star run by an English chef who was brilliant, but also like slightly psychotic sometimes. And it was like very much my welcome to New York moment, where I saw some things in there that like I don't even feel comfortable repeating because I think we would frown upon that kind of stuff in today's restaurant world.
Right.
Yeah, and then I was like, well, let's go up the ladder to other stars, and I spent some time at a 3-star in New York as well before coming to Copenhagen. And then I didn't have the intention to stay in Copenhagen. I was supposed to come for a month and stage at Amass and also spend some time at Relay. But I'm pretty sure Matt at Amass realized that I had like a European passport, and he was like, oh my gosh, maybe you want to work here. So that kind of wrote that story, and I never went back. It's obviously been not obviously, but it's been 10 years now in Copenhagen. And I spent all of my cooking life at Amass, which is a story of its own, but a very cool experience.
No, I mean, it has to be, right? I mean, we were just talking about Matt actually in the last episode, because we had Dan, who was head chef at Noma just after when Matt left Noma, and he was talking about a lot about how it was working with Matt. But how was Amass when you started there? Because again, for somebody who was coming from New York yourself, and Matt himself coming from Noma, a restaurant that he's made, which is it's so different from what Noma does. I think Amass is so different by its own, and it's made its own kind of people, its own kind of public, its own kind of crowd. What was it like working over there? How different was it from what you learned in culinary school or what you learned at the restaurants you worked at before?
I mean, I think there were a lot of differences. I think first and foremost, it was tough. It was like it was a small team, very ambitious menu. We changed menu all the time. That was like incredibly new for me. So much focus was put on the produce, of course, which meant that, you know, when the farmer didn't have the kilos of carrots that we needed, we switched. And for a young me who had never been in an environment like that, that was like incredibly difficult to sort of adjust to. But also it made you really sort of stay on your toes, and I think that was like really what kind of keeps you interested over time, that like you're constantly chopping and changing, and it's also I think an interesting experience for guests when you can kind of repeatedly come back and you see different things on the menu. I think also like coming to Copenhagen, it was a different vibe. I think I found many New York kitchens like quite aggressive. And I think in Copenhagen and at Amass, the only one that I can speak for is that like that was pretty absent. I think we worked our asses off, and it was like long and tough, but the vibe was great. And now I have like a friend here, but you know, I think from that I have like the closest core of my current friends as well, because I think you just form such a strong bond once spending so much time around an environment like that. I think very early on I realized that there was a huge emphasis around really sort of analyzing what we're throwing away, what does not get used, what gets wasted, and how we can sort of reduce that and actually use that to drive creativity in our menu development, and all of our sort of base processes, right? And how can we sort of apply different innovation techniques, whether it's sort of old school fermentation or new thoughts around that, and sort of utilize waste to create new ingredients, new dish concepts, etc. I think, you know, I remember back in New York, we would get like a lobster, and then you would use the tail, and then everything else would go to family meal, right? Yeah. Which is like, that's kind of what I thought was normal, right? We would use an avocado, but you would only take out the lightest green part, and everything else went
Yeah.
to family meal. And I think when we got to Amass, you started to really evaluate, well, that's a pretty bullshit way of thinking, especially in this day and age where resource depletion is such an issue. Maybe on a small scale we can actually sort of try and be better, and I think that is the main thing that I will always take away from that. And I think it has driven sort of what we do at Endless, how we look at everything we do, and just it has informed how I feel about the food system in general. But that was a core focus that we did on a small scale, and trying to do that and trying to see that maybe on a larger scale within the food system, I think is also really exciting. Yeah.
And what are some of these things that you could mention? Because I remember the one time I was there, I remember tasting the fish noodles, for example. I found that a very cool concept to reduce that into. I mean, there is composting and there are other methods, but if you can keep it within the restaurant, keep it circular. I remember trying the lemon tamari. I loved that innovation. Also, the brunches we spoke about before starting to record, about the potato pancake brunch. That was a very cool concept to make it more familiar, not just with the kitchen team, but with people who can't afford, say, eating an Amass meal. They can have a humbler version of it. And I also tried the ice cream, for example. I think it was with Hansen or some ice cream brands.
Yeah.
Which was this rye bread caramel or salted caramel.
Yeah, exactly. I
So
mean,
tell us about some of these innovations.
Yeah, I mean, on a very simple level, we did a lot of sort of drying and powdering and using as seasonings. So we could do that with, citrus skins and vegetable skins. And then we kind of moved on to, well, what if we sort of ferment things before we dry them? So all of the parsley stems that we didn't use in a dish, we would ferment and then dry. And then it turns into like a seaweed wakame style sort of powder, right? And that starts to also open up possibilities. All of the vinegars that we made were sort of results of infusions with skins or ends of vegetables or citrus. And then you sort of move to slightly more complex things where we are developing sort of misos and garums that are based on koji bases, but integrated with all of the sort of small side streams that come from the kitchen, everything from sort of coffee to meat trim to lemon, like you said. And then we moved further along the path, and I think, like late 2017, I remember we were taking excess SCOBY from our kombuchas, and we would like sort of bury them in sugar and then dry them out. So then, what we got was like, the most amazing sort of gummy out of used SCOBY, right? And then indeed with Henson's and on a smaller scale before, across the street we had Lille Bakery, and like most bakeries, they have excess bread. And we thought, well, maybe there's something we could do with bread. And this is also something that Kim was really driving, where we were able to take the bread and sort of extract all of the latent sugars that are available in the starch. And then reduce it down to sugar syrup. And with that sugar syrup, we made an ice cream base. And we did that on the small scale in the restaurant, but we also did that with Henson's for sort of like commercially available ice cream or popsicles, right? So I think, if you look at a Amass, not everything was super complicated. I think we started from very sort of basic ways to utilize waste, oils, vinegars, dried powders, etc. Move into sort of more umami-based fermentation techniques, and then more sort of integrated products that we were able to do on a slightly larger scale. I think if we look at one dish often that we think about and that really utilizes sort of that whole ethos, we did a pumpkin dish, and there were these like beautiful Crown Prince pumpkins, where we would take the flesh and kind of like turn it into a beautiful little puck, and then we took the guts and the seeds and we fermented that and dried it into like a very like sort of cool cheesy like powder. And then we took all of the outside skin and blackened it sort of in the same way that you would make black garlic, and blended it into like a paste. And so this dish was like, on the bottom it would be a paste of like blackened pumpkin skin, and then you would put this like puck of actual pumpkin flesh that we had confit in mushroom oil, and then we would cover it with like crunchy bits of this fermented seed powder. And really in that one sort of bowl you can kind of see the whole pumpkin, utilizing everything. And that kind of, I think it's a really great sort of representation of just our whole thought process around food at that point.
Yeah, no, cool ideas, all of them. I mean, every time I hear about these dishes like this, I mean, it's so much creativity that can come out of it. And what's inspiring is it doesn't stay. I mean, especially when you're a restaurant like Amass, I think you end up not only influencing other restaurants, because a lot of restaurants which are, say, not in the same category of restaurants, they kind of inspire themselves to see what else is possible out there, but also the consumers trying to possibly do something similar on their scale of things, to realize that if this can be elite and this can be worth paying a menu for, then maybe it is worth creating products around it. And then the innovations that you mentioned, which are more commercial, like the ice cream, I think that itself is a statement for a consumer to start paying price. I think that change from like throwing garbage to paying a price for that garbage, I say in like inverted commas, itself is the transition we need in the world to appreciate these food systems, when products like the ones you're creating don't have to like shout too much of themselves, and there's a general awareness that there is more possibility, and that it's worth paying the price, because then you're not paying the price for the most finest caviar, but you're paying it for all the work and the process and the drying and aging that's gone behind getting there, right? And
Yeah.
then from these ideas, like a restaurant existing which has all these cool things going on, it has an endless road ahead for itself. What happens that it decides to shut the restaurant? I mean, whatever you can share, I leave it up to you. And how does that transform into a restaurant also? Because how does the company work now? Because right now it's you, Matt, and the third partner, I think it's Christian. How do three of you kind of function to make this company, and why do you shut the restaurant?
Yeah, I mean, I think Amass unfortunately sort of was crushed by these COVID loans at the end, and I think that was kind of the main driver, and that was a really unfortunate sort of end to that. I think that like when we moved on from that, there was always a thought of, well, can we actually take some of the philosophy and the learnings around sustainability within the food system that we developed at Amass and try and apply it on a larger scale? And I think that sort of was our drive to create Endless. It wasn't until later that we actually focused on chocolate specifically, but it was just, so how can we take everything we learned, try to have more impact on a larger scale. In a restaurant we have the opportunity to impact 40 to 60 people, but like you said, there's millions of people who open up a Lay's bag every day, and can we make a positive impact on that level of the food system? And that's kind of what drove us to start Endless. And we started sort of in a very different way. We kind of wanted to see if we could do projects with external partners. We sort of like we did at the end of Amass's time, where we were, for example, working with IKEA to help them utilize some of their canteen waste to develop new ingredients for their own sort of food systems. But I think at some point we were like, well, I think we should focus on one thing, and let's make it really fun and playful. We have done this thing with chocolate in the past. How can we sort of focus on that? And like I said earlier, I think like after doing sort of immense industry research, we realized after peeling back the layers that there's actually a lot of sort of opening here to create something of a solution where we can actually work with the existing chocolate industry to hopefully create something that will alleviate some of their pain points going forward. And that's kind of what put us on this path. At the moment, it's Christian and I who are running sort of day-to-day operations and the strategy and the vision behind the company. Matt is I don't even know if I can say this here, but he will open up a restaurant at some point soon, right? And that's really where his heart is, and I think we have found a really great balance in him being an amazing ambassador for the company, and the chocolate product that we've created. But also, I think we will see some sort of collaboration between Endless and whatever sort of restaurant outlet comes from his big beautiful brain, because no doubt it will also be focused on sustainability on multiple different levels, but yeah, that's kind of how we operate today.
And Max, why does chocolate come up? Because when you said, first of all, when you shared like you are from a Swiss Korean family, how does, because the Swiss side I can understand, they understand chocolate, I guess, right? But how does your Korean side connect with chocolate?
I don't know if it really does. I think like we never really ate very much chocolate growing up. I think my dad, he would always bring some stuff back from Switzerland, so there I was privy to some really nice stuff. But I think, Endless's chocolate story starts at Amass, and it's something that we, in the effort to be as local as possible, we had to sort of evaluate some of these ingredients that we were using: olive oil, lemons, coffee, chocolate. We cut out most of them, but coffee and chocolate were pretty hard to sort of do. I'm pretty sure people would be pretty angry if we never served coffee in the restaurant anymore. So that kind of drove the thought process of, well, for example, with chocolate, if we're not going to use actual chocolate, can we build it ourselves, essentially? And at that point, Matt also had a brewery called Bogenmann Build that was producing lots of brewer spent grain, as all breweries do, as a byproduct. And that's kind of where the thought process started. And it functioned in the restaurant as sort of like an R&D project that we played around with and served once in a while, but not until sort of we really got going with Endless did it become a real focus for us. And now we're knee deep in it. So.
And looking at this chocolate innovation, right? Like, what do you think? Where does this product stand right now? What is it? What does it need from the market? Or like, I don't think it should get as trendy as, say, to buy chocolate at the moment, how it is. But what is the kind of hopeful future for the product?
Yeah, I think the main thing is the tip of the mountain. It would be like, can we coat every Mars bar in THIC and avoid using shitty processed palm oil filled compounds, right? Like at multiple levels, what we consume on a sort of large scale commercial level is not really chocolate. It's mostly fat and sugar, and everything to sort of avoid high cost. And I think, if there was a better way at looking to provide sort of a delicious chocolate experience for people with a little bit more planetary consciousness, I think that's kind of our aim, right? And hopefully we can sort of build a company that focuses on providing that same flavor experience, that same chocolate experience on a large scale. Without compromising, but maybe with sort of some added benefits on the sustainability side, and then I think the other thing is like chocolate is such a touchy thing, right? Because your favorite chocolate is probably very different from my favorite chocolate. If you look at different parts of the world, sort of like maybe if we look back to the starting conversation about what chili and spice means to people, chocolate is completely different in Northern Europe than it is in Mexico or the United States. So I think that is also something that we play with a lot, and it's a pretty difficult one because there's no one ring to rule them all. We have to kind of like evaluate different markets and understandings and interests in chocolate, and that will also sort of help us drive forward.
And talking to you, Max, as a chef, like, for example, like this is a challenge, right? The challenge you're talking about. I think most of the challenge in this challenge is coming from your aspiration of the company wanting to take this stride, because if you don't know it, the word, I think, will continue in a worse way, but it will go on, right? And that's the challenge you face as a company today. But then you also have challenges when you're a chef, a pregnant lady walks in, or somebody has a random allergy, or you run out of carrots, as you said before. But in both of these challenges, Max, yourself, is the same person. What do you think do you need different as today in the kind of role that you do? And what do you, like, how much of that creativity, if I call it, does come from restaurants, and how much of it are you like relearning and continuously renovating yourself?
I mean, I still think that like the bulk of my thought process in our current sort of product development or food focused things, that experience comes from the restaurant, and I think that cannot be understated. I think that like we said earlier, flavor is the driver for everything in the food industry. It will be the driver for any sort of change to a more sustainable or healthy food system. I think that like we have all experienced sort of buying something that was high in fiber or high in protein, and then it tasted like shit, and you never buy it again, right? And I think in the world of sort of making an alternative, we need to not compromise on flavor. And I think that sort of like real core pillar for us, that comes from my restaurant background. I think what is very different now is that like in a restaurant, in many of my past experiences, we tended to sort of R&D and R&D and R&D, and you have all the time to sort of perfect something. And then when you think it's at a certain perfection level, then you give it to a guest during whatever a service, right? I think what is very different here in this sort of startup life is that our R&D process has to go like this, and it has to go extremely fast, because what is way more valuable than your actual R&D process is the feedback that you actually get from users or sort of consumers, right? Because based on that feedback, we can iterate and change our R&D process to get what people are actually looking for and what they find delicious. So I think that has been a completely different mindset, right? That we actually need to speed up the R&D process. It is all about the feedback that we get from people who are actually eating the product. That is the most important sort of driver to show you in which direction you should go, and not to sort of R&D in a box and be like, well, I have created, thus people will enjoy, you know? So I think that's kind of, I think that's the main difference that I always think about. But much of sort of our process really is sort of bolstered by our experience in restaurants, no doubt.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it's very interesting what you say. I mean, it's nice to hear from you, because these are the concepts you read in a book, like the lean startup methodology of like keeping on testing with real clients and like listening to them more than just making this very crazy ass complex MVP and then realizing the customer doesn't want it at all. And I mean, that I completely understand from you, like how you say that learning comes from a kitchen. But what I would be curious about is, how do you see craftsmanship and scale? Because craftsmanship is what you can afford to do at a restaurant. Every diner can eat something different and they would be impressed by it. But again, at scale, you can't permit being craftsmen with everything. You have to have some sort of consistency, be it batches or be it the whole product itself. Like a Hershey's bar tastes the same whenever you pick it up. How is that a challenge for you? Was it something you guys have to get used to now, that consistency is key and people want this consistent product rather than, say, just variants in every batch?
Yeah. I mean, I think, a very sort of simple challenge is the fact that it just, on larger scale, all of this takes longer. You can't just walk back into your kitchen and try another small batch, right? Because so much of what we do on a small batch does not translate to 1,000 kilos. That's so much changes in that process. So often, if we sort of lose focus of that, I think, it can feel that maybe the challenge is that we actually lose touch with the actual cooking process that we're in. But I think what we have learned is to actually make those sort of small scale processes. We need to start with something already that we can envision has sort of a long-term scaling potential. Mm-hmm. I think, also what all of these startup books, I guess, will teach you is that your idea shouldn't be scalable. Your idea should just be an idea that you can kind of test. And then you have to figure out how you can actually iterate on that and make it scalable. And I think, the craftsman part has just sort of shifted itself a little bit from not just staring into a pot and trying to make the best sauce, but like looking at big tanks and figuring out, so how does like air pressure and temperature really affect this thing at large scale, for example. So I think there's still a lot of sort of overlap. I think that the challenge for us is to actually figure out, how do we implement our experience on a larger scale with machinery that's new to us, with processes that are slower, with partners that we have to work with that require sort of human interaction and communication to dial in what we're actually looking for. I think it's craftsmanship maybe on a different level. I think probably a lot of people would disagree with that and feel that it's at some point it's like industrialized food, right? But
No,
so much
definitely.
of our system is focused on that, and trying to keep it as lean and clean as possible, is also really important for us.
Yeah, I think it's hell lot of creative than just making up something which you can't replicate. I think that is creative itself in its own place. But I'm not going to quote you or me. We had Dad on the podcast last week, and it's somebody who's been in a fine dining restaurant and is now in institutional catering. And he himself said that for him, what is impressive the most about cooking as a career is anything at scale, because it just questions everything that you've learned. It makes you question it. It makes you fail miserably, and
Yeah.
then making that work on scale, I think that is very creative. But like before I get into more about yourself, Max, the last question about Endless is, when you transformed your career as being a chef to now Endless, I would say collectively you, Matt, and Christian as well, what were the skills you had to learn? Like, I don't know, business books or law itself or registrations. What things did you have to learn, or what services maybe the industry has already that you don't have to learn? Somebody will do it for you. Like, which tips would you give to somebody listening to it who say maybe has an idea who wants to start up? I know your context is Copenhagen. That might change legally across countries, but just a baseline.
Well, I mean, one thing I really had to like hone in was like Excel, which sounds like an incredibly boring answer, but it is like so fucking
Yeah,
important, and we use it for
definitely.
so many things, right? No, but also I think that what has been difficult for us, and what we have gotten better with over time, I think, is the sales process. Like I said before, I think I kind of never ever envisioned being a front-facing salesperson. It always felt sort of disingenuine to me. But I think like what we have learned is actually we can really sort of be genuine, use our experience from restaurants to actually drive sales conversations. And I think slowly we're becoming more comfortable in that process. And then tied with that is like really really getting comfortable with rejection, and that like maybe that's something we all face at some point or another, but especially sort of in the sales process, it is it comes in very short intervals, and being able to kind of like an athlete kind of wipe your memory of the last bad play or whatever, you have to be able to kind of like move on and sort of approach everything as a new experience. And I think in the beginning that was that was new and difficult for us, you know. Yeah, I think so many other things. We're not experts on the legal side. We get a lot of support in many areas that we don't understand. We never scaled anything to a massive degree, and we get support on that side. But I think what has helped us all throughout this process is if you ask people for help, generally they are open and willing to help. You know, especially if it's in their area of expertise. And I think like people love to sort of offer assistance in something they have experience with. And I think maybe in the beginning we were a bit shy with this, because also in a restaurant we tend to kind of think inwardly, and all of the sort of resources we have in our brain and creativity should come from the people in the building. At this point, what we really understood is that like we really need to be genuine with people and develop a strong network of those that we can actually lean on for support. And I think that has really that has been a really great asset for us. That was also sort of something new that we had to understand. Um, but I'm also like an eternal optimist. So I think like I truly believe that like if you put it out there, people are always willing to sort of lend a hand, right? And I think that has been really nice for us as well.
Yeah, no, super. I mean, super cool answer. I think it's much more. I think a lot of people into like food tech startups and things like that end up reading, I don't know, story of Toyota and companies like that. But I think that's useful as well. But I think listening to your story of somebody who's personally done it, who's like starting to learn this from scratch, it's a very great. I don't know, it's a very great input for me, like myself, listening to it and relating a lot with you. And I think it prepares one also to kind of foresee what problems could come up. Even if you can't prepare yourself for it, it's better to like, yeah, just know that might come up, in the future. But yeah, moving on to maybe a question a little more personal towards you, Max.
Yeah.
How do you see this change? Because for you, this change happened because of the company having to shut down, the restaurant having to shut down, you have to move into this role. I still think it would have been a choice if you want to move on with this Endless or not. But had this not happened, how long do you see yourself in restaurants? And I mean, it's connected to the part like, how's your life right now and how is your life in restaurants?
Mm-hmm.
And would this change have happened if it wasn't forced upon you, or you would have just been going on with the restaurant industry?
I think that's a really good question. I think that like the very honest answer is that during COVID, for me, I saw the inherent fragility of the restaurant industry, and that is not. I don't know who's that's no fault of anybody, but I think I saw that like restaurants are really teetering on a knife's edge. Margins are super thin. Labor costs are extremely high. Of course, lots of great people are doing amazing things and very ambitious. But I really saw, well, shoot, like, you have something like COVID, which is no small event, of course. But we saw that kind of like ripple effect move throughout society, and I really think that like hospitality businesses, restaurants, they were smashed by this, right, financially and otherwise. And I think that kind of started a thought process in my mind of, well, okay, so if I feel a little bit uneasy about sort of the stability of the restaurant sort of model in general, how else can I look at using my food experience and my love for food in general? And I think that kind of sort of pushed in the direction of, well, so if I would like to do something and build something from scratch and it's not a restaurant, how do we actually do that? And I think I was very sort of taken, and forever will be, to the sustainability mission that sort of ran at Amass, and taking that and sort of my interest in building something from scratch, that really kind of drove my personal interest in creating something like Endless. I think if you talk to Christian and Matt as well, I know that Christian would have probably a similar answer in terms of, well, it would be really great to sort of build something from the ground up, utilize past experiences, be in a new category, create something completely new, and have that kind of that startup ride and see where that kind of takes us, right? I think that otherwise, I think, there are glimpses of time where I go into a restaurant and I'm like, shit, that looks fun. I can imagine myself doing that, and like, man, it was really fun to work late nights, and it's so amazing to have sort of the instant gratification of like working on something all day and then giving it to someone at night and having them enjoy that, hopefully. And that's a cool sort of interaction that I don't have anymore, right? What we're working on often, whether it's sort of admin projects or development projects, they take longer, and sometimes it's like, did I accomplish anything today? I don't really know if I did anything with my time, right? Where in restaurants, it's very, you're doing very tangible tasks and you can kind of see the fruits of your labor. So I think that has also been an adjustment from my side to be like, well, the lifestyle and the work environment is completely different. Of course, having a more sort of Monday to Friday, that was also completely a new thing. It sounds really silly, but like having to think about making lunch for yourself every day is like that is like a jigsaw
Yeah,
puzzle in and of itself, right?
I
Like in
get
a
that. Yeah,
restaurant, we had staff meal that was taken care of. You don't have to worry
yeah,
about these things. So I think like there's a huge shift, everything from really small sort of innocuous things to kind of more complex changes. But yeah, I think I found myself in a really good place and uh,
hmm
in a new industry where I can sort of still utilize food and be around food. But that being said, there's some moments in time where I look back at restaurants and I'm like, I mean, I could see myself, so
yeah,
who
yeah,
knows?
yeah. Yeah, who knows what comes, right? And Max, like, do you see yourself as a chef? Like, there's two questions to this. One is, do you see yourself as a chef? And second, do friends and family who know a little about what you do? I think it's a very difficult job to explain what you do right now.
Yeah,
Do they see you as chefs? Because this is important for me. Because it's very curious how somebody who feeds the least people or the highest price is seen as a chef. Because I think that also leads to innovations. I think many restaurants leading up to, I don't know, Madrid Fusion or some of these events, they build up innovations in the restaurants because there's an instant gratification in the client level, but also these recognitions and awards and these things that go on with restaurant chefs. But unfortunately, we have no idea who's producing Hershey's and Bounty and all these recipes. We do not connect them as food service or food industry at
yeah.
all. We just think it's a lab. It's this association we've made. I don't know if it's the packaging or the way we buy it. What kind of interaction is it that makes it? Like looking at this big picture, first question is, do you see yourself as a chef? And the second, do others see you as a chef?
I mean, I think that I'm pretty sure I will always see myself as a chef. I think that
Mm-hmm.
like one part of the previous question that I could have added is that like I will always see myself as a chef, but I was also a chef at some point who wanted to develop other skill sets, and I thought I don't want to only be a chef in the very traditional way. I want to be able to be a chef and then integrate sort of other skills in whether it be sort of organization building or Excel or sales or just business strategy in general to sort of hopefully create a rounded sort of max. So that was also, quite important for me in the early stage. I think that like if I think about others, I think my friends and family. I think at least my family. I think they think I'm a chef. I don't think they understand
Mm-hmm.
at all what I'm doing
Yeah.
in the chocolate business, which is fine. But I think others. I think maybe the perception changes a little bit that I'm.
Mm-hmm.
More in this sort of startup game that I was previously a chef. So I think it's kind of it's different, my own take and what people see of me. But that's also sort of how I see it, and yeah, maybe that's okay too.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's not going to be easy, right? And that's the idea with the podcast as well. I mean, I purposely call it like Fugitive Chefs because I feel all of us are working in food and maybe more impactful than just working in restaurants. And
Mm.
yes, there's always this, I mean, as you said, missing the staff lunch or also the flip side of it of having this evening free or things. I mean, I do not know about you. I think startup game has to be a little bit more complex on having like very intense days to very not so intense days.
Yeah.
But this fluctuation of routine, at least having some days when you have some time for yourself or the same friends and family you spoke about. I mean, I don't know, how is it for you? Do you feel you have more time to attend to these other sets of people in your life, or how's that gone, or the work-life balance?
Yeah, I think I do. I think the balance is a little bit better for sure. I think not working nights sort of opens up more time to spend with significant others, friends. You know, the weekends were sort of untouchable for me for many, many years. Um, and then in the same vein, I think, yeah, just like you said, startup life is like beautifully chaotic. It is, the peaks and the valleys are so intense. The amount of, I don't think I work any less, to be honest. I think like the work has been shifted in the day, but even that has allowed me to sort of have a little bit more time with family and friends, and I think yeah, that's also important for me. Yeah, often I think actually in this in a small scale startup, we it does feel a little bit like a restaurant in the sense that like it the intensity is high, and you're constantly going. I think in startups sometimes like it is a complete emotional roller coaster sometimes in one day, right? But that's also kind of again part of the fun. Yeah.
Yeah, super interesting, especially in your case. I mean, you have at least people around you who are, I think, hopefully going through the same emotions because they're also coming with your past and then facing this challenge together. I think it's a beautiful mix you found there, and hopefully at least you can like count on each other if you can't understand what's going on at some point, right, in everyday business. But
Yeah.
before we wrap up this podcast, Max, tell us about like, think about there are say three chefs out there who have the similar idea of starting a startup, getting out of the restaurants. What advice would you give to them? Like, I mean, you've given so many, I think, suggestions through this. I think about how working lean, on reiterating on these ideas together with feedback from people, thinking always like a chef. But what else could you add to this on people who are sort of scared to make that plunge? Because again, as you said, you know, in the beginning, there are not many role models out there of people who've come out of kitchens and sold something commercially. And we're always aspiring to climb up the ladder and do what the masters are doing. What would you say to them?
I mean, I think that's a good question. I think there's a couple different ways that I would look at it, but I do believe that really, especially if you want to stay in food and want to do food on a larger scale, whether it's with a corporate or starting something of your own, I think really remembering your sort of experience as a chef is incredibly important, and everything comes down to flavor. Understanding that like everything that we do currently, and I think what most food companies strive to do is create an incredibly delicious product, and if flavor is always the core of our decision making, the ideal end point is to make a delicious product. I think that really shines through because that will come through in conversations with others, with investors, if that's the route that you take. We can see that like there are so many great innovations. There's so many cool people doing like precision fermentation and really hardcore tech. But at the end, what is really moving any needle is sort of flavor and deliciousness, because at the end someone has to buy it and someone has to enjoy it. So I think like, you know, as a chef, I felt inadequate. Well, how can I get into the startup? I'm not I don't have an MBA from Harvard. I don't know all of the sort of legalese that's involved. I don't know how to raise money. I don't know how to do the sales process. I don't know anything about organization building. But I think like what we have developed in kitchens, so much of that resilience that we learn from working in kitchens and also in the front of the house, and so much of that sort of creative drive and the ability to adapt, and then I'll tie that down to sort of flavor. I think it gives you an amazing sort of platform to actually begin something either of your own or with something that already exists. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, super interesting what you said. I think it's I'm really impressed with what you said about like not forgetting your chef past and like counting on like rather than focusing on what you do not know, really falling back and holding strong on what you know. Because what I've also seen often on like startups coming from chef backgrounds is a lot of these chefs enter the industry, realize the industry has a lot of cheat codes for a lot of things. And some of them you have to adopt. Like, I do not think you should temper all the bars by yourself if there's an alternative for it. But I don't know, if you're adding cardamom to your chocolate, as an example, you should still go for the best produce of cardamom, go and talk to the farmers, still roast, still know things of your kitchen background and the values you bring, not just the techniques, but the value of how a restaurant works, how a chef works. And then there has to be a balance. But I think remembering that the flavor has to be the core, and this your chef past can still contribute a lot to a new ball game altogether. I think it's a very beautiful advice from you.
Yeah.
No, totally. And thank you so much for your time, Max. I think it's been a great chat. I knew a little about you, but I myself have learned so much about you. It's very exciting what you're doing. I look forward to what all comes out of Endless, what happens with THIC. And I suggest everybody to follow your work. I think you guys are doing some great work out there, and I wish you all the very best with it.
I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on. I think we haven't had that opportunity to sort of have this kind of discussion, and I think it is it's super interesting what you're doing. So I think also there are so many people maybe in the restaurant industry who would like to seek alternative ways to utilize their skill sets, and I think also being able to showcase some of that on especially on this podcast, I think it makes a lot of sense, and hopefully it helps others in the future. But I really appreciate you inviting me on. It was great.
Thank you so much, Max. It's been a pleasure.
Cool.